Hey everyone, welcome back to FPL Fran. Today's video is going to be my Gameweek 24 team selection as we look ahead towards building towards double Gameweek 25. But before I just jump into the video, we actually got some confirmed news today, which was actually that double Gameweek 28 has been announced, and that's going to be a matchup between Bournemouth versus Luton. So not only does that really confirm that actually Luton transfers are very good for Gameweek 24, but it also confirms that actually whatever strategy we go for the next few weeks, we do want to be thinking about bringing in potentially even more Luton players or even more Bournemouth players. Another thing that I think is worth mentioning, even though it's not relevant to my team, is that let's say you're someone who owns Solanke. I think it's totally fine to plan to sell Solanke just because the fixtures aren't amazing right now, and then actually bring him back, for example, on Game Week 26 when, let's say, if you're going for Darwin this week, for example, to just simply plan to bring Solanke back in. Now, of course, if you're going for Tony instead, as opposed to Darwin, maybe you don't necessarily need to bring Solanke back on Game Week 26 because ultimately it's not a good fixture. It's still City, and so maybe you can instead plan to, of course, bring Solanke back on Game Week 27 or 28 instead. So that's sort of an early thought in terms of Gameweek 28 and the impact it has. For me, the wider impact that it has in terms of the short term is that actually, instead of going for a triple Liverpool, I think it still makes more sense if you're not already tripled up on Liverpool to instead think about bringing in the Luton players instead, because you've got more guaranteed value over this sort of next 4 to 5 game weeks with the Luton players than compared to the Liverpool ones. Not only that, but we also know that Liverpool players are more than likely going to blank in Game Week 29. So actually the value and the efficacy, I suppose, of a Liverpool player is much less than a Luton player, where you know that they have a guaranteed double. They're pretty unlikely to actually blank in Game Week 29. That's dependent on their performance within the FA Cup and also Nottingham Forest performance in the FA Cup too. But we still think that, for example, Nottingham Forest will ultimately maybe lose to Man United even if they beat Bristol City, and that Luton will probably lose to City, as in Man City, which would probably lead us to having Luton players be available for Game Week 29. So that's something to point out right now, because we won't get the full picture until Game Week 27, but it still means that based on the information we know now, that a Liverpool or a Luton player is actually better than a Liverpool player, in my opinion, as a transfer. Not specifically for the next 2 game weeks. So if you're planning to wildcard in Game Week 27, disregard what I've said. But if you're planning to, let's say, hold on to your wild card for Game Week 30 and beyond, then I think what I've said is pretty relevant. In terms of my team last week for Game Week 23, we ended up with 88 points. So that was actually a very, very good game week. And once again, a huge green arrow, and that shot us to 1.25k in the world. So top 2k really, but 1,250 is round about my rank. It's 1,249 right now. So really, really insane rises the last few weeks, and finally, after a great start this season, we're starting to have some serious momentum at the back half of the season, and looking forward, of course, to see what our chip strategy can sort of bring to us right now. Right now with my team, though, just quickly, briefly recapping on Game Week 23, because I already did so in my transfer plans video. I have 5 double game weekers already, right? I've got Trent, I've got Darwin, and Triple City. Right now, I have 2 free transfers, basically, over the course of Game Weeks 24 and 25 to, let's say, improve my squad for Game Week 25. But I can also think about, let's say, how can I rectify my team or make it a little bit better for Game Week 26 and beyond? One thing that I'd like to point out is that my transfers are also quite dependent on Game Week 26, depending on whether Eze is back fit and ready to play versus Burnley at home. I think it's very, very unlikely because it seems like he's injured, and actually the timeline seems to be 3 weeks, and it could be worse. So even though I think it's very unlikely that Eze will come back to play in time, I still think that there's a small sliver of a chance that I can actually get him back, and he would actually serve my team very well. For that reason, I'm probably not going to be transferring Eze out unless I suddenly have a change of plans and I'm planning to wildcard on 27 or something like that. Personally, I don't think it makes sense for my team. And the reason why people are suggesting wildcard 27 is because we will get the full landscape of all the doubles for Game Week 34 by that sort of period for Game Week 27. What I don't like about Game Week 27 wildcard, though, for my team specifically, and this is not going to apply to all people, is that, as you can see, I've got 4 Chelsea and Tottenham players and then 2 Liverpool players. So actually, even though I have 2 free transfers, my team is still going to look really bad for Game Week 26, particularly if Eze is injured. And for that reason, it doesn't really make sense for me to make short-term moves unless I know for sure, for example, that Eze is going to be coming back fit and I only really need to take a hit, and then Wildcard 27 is a really interesting play. Why people are planning Wildcard 27 is simply because they have a bench boost strategy in mind for Game Week 28. I don't think I'm going to be employing that right now, but I will be making a chip strategy video very shortly off the back of this video to talk about that. For my team this week, though, when I look at my defense, particularly from Game Week 23, I think that all of these players have still wonderful fixtures this week, right? We have a lot of home fixtures, and as you know, I always like my home fixtures. And for that reason, I think it makes sense for me to actually play Trent once again, Porro once again, and Walker once again. I do think there's a bit of a 50-50 toss-up this time around with, let's say, Walker, Porro, and Gabriel. Those three players could potentially drop out. Yes, of course, you look at the City team. Yes, they're a good defense, but they don't keep their clean sheets. And it is starting to become, a consistent reality. And maybe, of course, Gabriel is someone that I prefer over Walker. So I think based on the attacking upside of Gabriel, I could very well just go Gabriel over Walker for this Everton fixture. I have to play Dubravka, in my opinion, over Areola, unless I'm planning to make a transfer. But I'll talk about my sort of 3 transfer options that I have, including, for example, one of them, which would be rolling my transfer this week. But this is going to be, assuming that I roll right now, this is going to be my team selection. So I'll play Dubravka, and Dubravka, of course, just simply has a better fixture than Areola, and that's going to be my defense for this week. In the midfield, I'll be playing Palmer, Foden, Richarlison, and Saka, so very reminiscent to recent weeks where, unfortunately, with the Eze injury, we have to sort of be rolling out with this structure. And then my front line will be Darwin, Watkins, and Haaland. What I like about this team is that ultimately, even though I have a chance here to go with a triple Liverpool team, probably I don't need necessarily to use that transfer, because if I'm going for a Liverpool player, as I said, it sort of makes my team a little bit worse for free hit 29, or forces me rather to a free hit 29 strategy. And I'm not sure necessarily if that's the best sort of course to play right now. As we know, based on blank gaming 29 and how it looks, based on what Ben Crellin, for example, suggests that the transfers could lay out to be, based on, for example, our expectations of teams advancing the FA Cup, it's not a great blank game week 29, where I think the upside of getting the free hit is maybe getting potentially more Brentford players, potentially more Luton players, but we would already be accumulating Luton players as a result of the announcement of the double gaming 28. So I don't really see the upside necessarily to crafting a squad around free at 29. So for that reason, I think it makes sense for me to maybe skirt the Liverpool transfer this week and actually roll the free transfer, have a little bit more information, see whether Salah is back, and that would sort of allow me to determine whether a midfield transfer towards someone like Jota or Luis Diaz would actually make a lot of sense for Game Week 25. And that's sort of the landscape right now of my team. As far as, let's say, if I was actually to make a free transfer this week, I think I've got 3 options. First of all, as I said, it's going to be rolling and playing my team as it is right now. So the reason why I want to do that is because having 2 free transfers is always something that's incredibly powerful in FPL. This week, I feel like I'm not pressured by anything. And I also do really need additional information, right? I need to see whether Eze is going to come back fit and ready to play in Game Week 26. And then I also need to determine, as I said, the Salah news, which would actually allow me to take maybe either an aggressive approach to double Game Week 25 and go for a Liverpool player, or take a little bit more of a cautious approach and sort of a little bit more of a measured, sort of thought out approach by going for Luton players instead. Now, the alternative is that I go for a Luton player, because what's nice about Luton is that we have quite a few guarantees. We have the double gaming 28 guarantee, and that's probably enough value where I would say the Luton player is a very good transfer, because we know that even, let's say, if there's a miracle situation and Luton beat Man City, which I think is so unlikely for the FA Cup, ultimately what will happen is that Doughty will blank in gaming 29 and maybe will be forced into free at 29 anyways. But actually knowing that you have a player who's going to basically play over 2 doubles over the next 4 game weeks is insane for, the value of Doughty. And the beauty, of course, of bringing in either a Luton or a Liverpool player this week is that they both have good fixtures. I've talked about this in my cheat sheet video as well. Liverpool versus Burnley at home, Luton versus Sheffield United at home. If you look at, for example, any of the gambling odds, this is the best fixture that Luton have had all season long, not to mention that their attack has recently looked like it's improved a lot. And part of the attack, actually, ironically, is Doughty, right? You're bringing in a defender who is actually one of their sort of leading chance creators. And when you look at underlying stats like expected assists per 90, he's one of the top players within the Premier League for that. And so if you're doubling up on, let's say, fixtures, then Doughty's underlying stats are very, very good. So I do really like Doughty as a transfer for Colwell, and that would probably lead me to benching either one of Porro or Walker. I'd probably bench Walker potentially within this situation, just because I think Porro always has a lot of attacking upside. But then there's also the flip side where Brighton, I think, are very likely to score versus Tottenham. So maybe I would actually keep Walker here in this situation and then actually play Doughty as well. And then Dubravka, of course, is going to keep staying within my team. Now, transfer option number 2, if I'm actually to make a transfer, is actually, instead of actually fielding, let's say, Ariel or Dubravka, to transfer one of these 2 keepers into either Kaminsky or Alisson Becker. What I like about Kaminsky, of course, is that his chances of actually playing Game Week 29 are pretty high. And so if you're bringing in Kaminsky, it seems like you can get a lot of value and make sure that you have no sort of blanking keepers over this period. And so that's why I quite like Kaminsky as an idea. I think I still prefer him over Alisson Becker. The last option is a little bit more of a crazy option. I think it's going to be Eze to Luis Diaz. Part of this, though, is that we have to get guaranteed news from Klopp that maybe Salah is not fit to play for Gameweek 25. Because my issue, I suppose, is that if, let's say, Salah is fit and ready to play for Gameweek 25, there's even less of a chance that players like Luis Diaz or Jota will actually get the minutes that we actually want for them to be considered good picks for double Gameweek 25. So for that reason, I do think that Luis Diaz is a very sort of aggressive transfer, and that could really lead to hurting my team because, of course, that's a lot of transfer value being spent, and it's not exactly the best sort of play. The alternative play that I have as well, and this is a crazier one, is actually a fourth transfer option, which is actually to go from Colwill to Van Heck this week and to sort of book a transfer already ahead of time to go from Eze to Diogo Jota. Once again, though, this is one of those transfers where I would only do or follow this transfer path or variation if I was 100% sure that Salah's not fit and ready to play any of the fixtures in double Gaming 25. Once again, I think if he's ready to play one of the fixtures, it's probably likely that he takes 90 minutes away from another key player, or at least a mix of key players between Luis Diaz, Darwin, and Jota, even Gakpo as well. And for that reason, I think that sort of lowers the value of transferring in a Liverpool midfielder. So those two options aren't too interesting for me. I do think that even when I look at the defenders, there is another option, of course, where I go from Pedro Porro to Virgil van Dijk. But that also means that in the future, because Colwill is actually quite useless to me right now, that I have to book a transfer in Gaming 26 for Colwill. That could work quite well, but what I like about Porro is that ultimately his fixtures are beautiful after Gaming 26. So if you actually look at any Tottenham player, it's very likely that we're all going to move into a template structure where we have 3 Tottenham players going forwards up until Gaming 33. And right now, because I'm not planning to wildcard in the short term, I think that keeping a Tottenham player like Richarlison, like Porro, is perfectly fine. And the same sort of strategy, I would say, can be applied to someone like Palmer. I'd probably rather have 10 players that I think are very good for Gaming 26 than needlessly take a hit and go towards 11 players, just for the sake of actually fielding out an 11 for that time period. So it really just depends. I think Palmer, Richarlison, Porro are still amazing, and that's why I don't really like the idea of transferring such players right now. As I said, going back to the transfer options, I think the most serious options for me right now are to actually go for a Luton player, because we have a lot of guarantees with Luton, and I think Doughty is probably the most exciting, most interesting one. But at the same time, I think there's a huge upgrade between, let's say, Kaminsky and some of my other players for next week for double Gaming 25 as well, because ultimately the fixtures that I have for double Gaming 25 aren't really good between the two keepers that I have. And on the other hand, Kaminsky actually has pretty good fixtures. So for me, okay, with exception to, let's say, the Liverpool one, but we expect that game to be, a lot of shots created, potential save points as well for Kaminsky. Probably actually a worse game for Doughty if you're thinking about how the game will play out, because ultimately if you look at a game like Flecken versus Brentford, I'm not saying that Flecken's going to get or let's say Kaminsky's going to get an assist necessarily, but you can see, of course, in a situation where you play versus a much tougher team, you're expected to concede a lot of shots, and therefore you're expected to make save points. Whereas, let's say in a situation with Kaminsky, for example, if he's going to face Liverpool, you're sort of expecting the same. Whereas Doughty, I think, maybe less of a chance that he's actually going to be as creative and as attacking as we necessarily expect him to be versus Liverpool. Although, of course, you will have the value of Doughty in double Gaming 28. The question, I suppose, is whether you go Kaminsky first or Doughty first, or whether you actually go for both. In the midfield, there's an alternative pick of, let's say, Barkley as well, but I just don't really think I have space in my midfield for that. I'd much rather He-Chan, just because I actually need someone in Eze's position to actually play for my team Gaming 26. So that's why in the distance, as a transfer plan, I do like Eze to He-Chan if Eze's not ready to play for me in Gaming 26. On top of that, though, just quickly rounding out for this week with Captaincy, I think Captaincy is actually quite set and determined. For me, it's either between Haaland and Darwin. Right now, because Haaland actually just played 85 minutes of football, which is a bit of a shock to me. I actually thought that he'd play much less. I think that he's probably as close to full fitness as possible. The issue, of course, is going to be the overhanging element of the European fixture versus Copenhagen, and really how many minutes is Haaland going to play before he gets rested. My thing is that I think Pep is the type of player who tends to, let's say, play Haaland a bit more, because if he's confident that he's fully fit, he's not someone who necessarily feels like there's a need to sort of mix rest and rotation in there, as you can see with KDB already clocking so many minutes. And so for that reason, I do think that Haaland is probably going to be my captaincy option, and then Darwin's going to be the vice captaincy. I have every bit of confidence that Darwin's going to be an amazing pick for this week, and potentially, of course, on another day, or if we get some Haaland news, a little bit of spicy leak, of course, for Darwin, that I think Darwin's going to be my captain. But for now, this is going to be my team selection for Gaming 24. As I said, I'm planning to roll, but do let me know which transfer plan do you like the most. Is it Colwill to Doughty, or is it one of the keepers to Kaminsky? Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video. Goodbye.